Welcome to another episode of Homerik. Today we're going to discuss about the study of demonology. What is demonology? How has it affected history? When did it start? What's involved? These are questions I've always been curious to find out. So today I want to take a dive into one of the most darkest, studious pieces of literature. Let's get into it. Now, if you could consider anything to be a science, demonology shouldn't be part of that. But however, during the 15th century in Europe, this was very much a science. During this time in Europe, Catholicism was the most dominant religion. And so between 15th and 16th centuries, this was prevalent in all forms of education. During this period of history, we had events called the witch hunts. Refer to my video on the witches of Salem to learn more about the Puritans and how they were influenced by this craze. And during this time, these witch hunts were intensified by pieces of literature that gave guidelines on how to persecute witches. People could not explain some of the darkest things that happened to humanity. For example, the Black Death. Demonology was a way to explain sickness or disease or other events. Think about it from their time, right? Somebody who was living during the Black Death, a peasant who had no education, who could barely keep themselves afloat or living healthily. That was not a thing. Imagine coming home and your only cattle dying and your entire farm dying, knowing that there's this plague around the earth. You would have thought nothing other than it was the devil who was wreaking havoc on all mankind. These are people who did not understand weather patterns or biology or the nature of diseases. It was spiritual for them. Did you know that demonology was actually partially created as a form of counter-reformation in order to bring people back into the Catholic Church against the Protestants? And it was only until the Renaissance when we started to see the rise of science and the decline of things religious. Now, of course, religion was still very influential during the Renaissance, don't get me wrong, but the discovery of new technology and new information revealed so many inadequacies in our way of life during that time. It was the decline of demonology at that point, and also the decline of witch hunts as well. And partially, the story of demonology trails back to the story of women oppression and how women would be fearful of not only men, because it was a patriarchal society, of course, but also women would fear themselves. Women were thought to be more influenced by the devil because of carnal reasons. Carnal reasons meaning sins of the flesh, the hypocrisy. The truth was that men feared women having power. Demonologists wrote extensively on the subjects of the typical witch, the practices of witches, devils and demons, exorcism, and the methods for trying and executing witches. Some works you might be interested in looking for historical reference are Heinrich Kramer and Jacob Sprenger for writing the Malleus Maleficarum, written in 1486. Jean Baudin, who wrote on the demon-mania of witches, written in 1580. Henry Boguet on an examen of witches in 1590. And Nicholas Remy, who wrote on demonolatry, written in 1595. Fun fact, Malleus Maleficarum, the infamous book, sold more copies than any other book except the Bible for almost 200 years. It was based on the biblical text and the command in Exodus, "Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live." And it became the guidebook for inquisitors and judges to try and execute witches. This Malleus Maleficarum, the hammer of witches is what it means, was the reason for the hysteria in all of Europe for over 200 years. It spread like wildfire. It popularized the heresy of witches. Before Malleus Maleficarum, witches were only tried if their intent was malicious, which means whether you had practiced white magic or black magic. It was only if you had used black magic to influence others or to invoke pain on others you would be tried and executed for. Malleus Maleficarum said that all witchcraft was heresy against God, and you were doomed for having practice. It influenced the noble hierarchy to make a business out of witch hunting. This is one of the most despicable books in the history of humanity. Yet, it provides so much insight into the minds of these people. Wouldn't you agree? There are 3 parts to this book. The first part explained about the beliefs of witches. It also goes into great depth about what witches do in their practice. Part 2 is how witches harm people and how it could be prevented. So these are steps that one should take in order to protect themselves. And part 3 were about the legalities on trying witches. In this book, it was recommended that judges should lie to the accused to see if they could get more information about the truth of their witchcraft, whether they were witches or not. Sometimes people lie to get out of a situation. If somebody were to just say,
"Tell me if you're a witch, and I'll let you go. You'll go far away from here, but I'll let you go."
and you just, out of desperate need, say, "Yes, okay, I'm a witch," they would lie to you about your indemnity, and they would burn you at the stake for it. Horrible. Horrible. Absolutely inhumane. And to think that the authors of this book justified their means, their harsh tactics, by saying that it was to protect the pious and the innocent on no basis of science at all. Science. Demonology as a science. Now let's dive into something a little bit interesting. It's actually easier to classify the hierarchy of heaven than it is to classify the hierarchy of demons here. Demons, over time, have had a different history amongst different religions, and a lot of these stories are very much shared between these other civilizations. So we're talking about as good of a orderly process as I could make it. Okay, so bear with me. The word demon actually comes from the Greek word daimon. It means divine power, God, and it also means fat. And the word demon means replete with wisdom, or something that is so full of knowledge. You wouldn't really take it for that. You'd probably think it's like something very horrific to call something a demon, which of course When we think about a demon, it is horrific. But in this case, demon actually means very knowledgeable. And a demon's purpose, its sole purpose, as told by these demonologists, was to influence mankind to commit immoral acts. I would argue that Malleus Maleficarum was written by demons. And demons were supposedly the fallen angels after Lucifer, following in Lucifer's footsteps from his expulsion of heaven. Devil, on the other hand, also comes from the Greek word diabolos, which means to slander. There's a very big question as to how many names does the devil have. We hear Lucifer, Satan, Beelzebub, etc., etc. Well, let's clarify something. Lucifer means the morning star, or the light bringer, or the shining one. These are the sort of terms that describe Lucifer. The word Satan actually derives from Hebrew, and it means the enemy. And the name Beelzebub is also Hebrew, and Beel, or Baal, means to be the king of, and Zebub comes from the word flies. So, quite literally, Beelzebub means the Lord of Flies. Good book, by the way. There are two sources which contributed to the hierarchy of demons here. The hierarchy of demons, as explained by Alphonse de Spina in 1467. Alphonse de Spina was actually one of the first sources where we actually started to see creatures like goblins, succubi and incubi, and other creatures of this nature come to existence in our folklore. And the Lantern of Light. Nobody knows who wrote the Lantern of Light, but we know that it was written in 1409, and it was the first instance of describing the 7 deadly sins, where each sin is governed by a particular demon, such as greed, governed by Mammon. So in combination between Alphonse de Spina's folklorish creatures and the Lantern of Light's 7 deadly sins, which you could attest to the work of Dante Alighieri, really provided a pathway for people to organize demonology. And of course, we can't talk about demonology without talking about exorcisms. Did you know that exorcism comes from the Greek word exousia, which means an oath? And this oath is bestowed upon the devil, that who inhabits that body must commit to acting in a way contrary to what he wants. He is under oath by God. And there are 2 reasons for exorcising someone, or exorcising a demon out of someone, I should say. One is to get the demon out. But the second one is to find out more information about what the demon knows. Now, I must say this too. Exorcisms are not to be taken lightly. Even the Catholic Church doesn't take exorcism lightly. You can only exorcise someone with the approval of the Catholic Church. Otherwise, it's not a holy exorcism. Thereby saying that possession is not an automatic explainer for unexplainable behavior. You don't know if that person's experiencing a mental condition. It doesn't give you the right to just exorcise on this person. Exercise. Speaking of possession, there are 2 ways someone could be possessed in these legends, of course. Either the devil directly passes into that person through the consent of the victim, or they could be bewitched. You can see why some of these people out in the 14th, 15th, and 16th century thought that, well, the devil was very prominent because they couldn't explain a lot of this mental condition stuff. They had no education, so they thought that the person was just possessed. Exorcise! Devil! Demon! Witch! Well, in this case, one of the things that was supposed to dictate that somebody was being possessed by a demon or the devil was that the person would have an unexplained seizure. This was a complete seizure. And there are 4 stages to this possession. Take a look at a book called Hostage to the Devil for reference. There is an actual entry point from which the devil or demon can enter from. Upon entering, there must be a sequence of erroneous judgment, where this person does not make good choices. Third, they yield to the control of the invader, meaning they let go of whatever resistance they have, and they allow that demon or devil to control. And the final phase is perfect possession, where you are basically now that embodiment of that demon. I don't wish any of this upon any of you, not that I really believe in it, but I should say, demonology is a darker history than I actually thought. I found out things that I was surprised to hear. I'm grateful for the time we live in. I know sometimes thinking about what's happening in the world can get a little bit daunting, but when you really think about it, I would rather not live in any other time. So be grateful for what you have. Because there were moments in history where life would have been terrible. If you like this video, give it a like and subscribe to Homerik to find out more interesting topics like this one. Don't forget to join our group, Dark Mythology, on Facebook, so that you can be a part of this community and discuss with other people like-minded as you. That's all for today. See you on the next one.